Hello, we're live.
Hi.
Hey,
Hey.
What's up?
Hello from Rotterdam. Where's everybody else at the moment?
I'm in London.
Berlin?
Portugal.
Nice one. Steffi, you look really tanned.
Yeah, I made a
Jealous.
classic mistake of being in the sun too long today. The beaches are open again, so it's nice and quiet still because people are not allowed to travel. We live close to a surfer kind of hotspot, but there are no tourists there, so it's a very big beach with only a few people. It's really
Okay, nice.
really nice now. Yeah, yeah.
What beach is it?
It's close where we live. Is close to Ericeira. Do you know that?
Oh,
It's
okay.
like
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
nice.
yeah. Really nice, really nice. Yeah, it's like a 15-minute drive away from where we are.
Mm.
Yeah.
Hey, Sam. Can you move over a little bit? I want to see what's behind you.
Uh,
Quick studio
you
view.
mean move out of the way? You mean?
Yeah,
Sorry.
what's all that? What's all that stuff? Got a.
Let me see. Um, this is like just the home setups, mostly kind of modular and Electron stuff, kind of here. Can lift you up a little bit, but yeah, home is kind of sort of yeah, modular central, and
Nice.
I actually have Steffi's old studio
Yeah, yeah.
that I
That's
share
cool.
that not here, but that I share with Andy and Nick Hupner.
Ah, okay, so you have a home recording setup, and then you have an out of the outside studio as well.
Yeah, the shared one is more kind of old hardware and drum machines and more kind of um, sort of ready to go, kind of everything hooked up to a Circon. Um,
Oh,
and this
you're a
is
Circlone user as well. Nice,
yeah, yeah, can't live without it.
You
It's
have
nice.
one over there as well. Do you have one in your studio? What are you using to sequence?
You're so sharp, Steffi, so I can live without it because I don't have one at home.
Because you don't.
No, but yeah, I've got I'm on the waiting list with Colin
Or second
for
one.
getting one here as well. I think.
Mm.
Yeah,
Where did you write your album, in this one or in the other one, or a combo? The last album you did, your solo
uh,
project.
bit of both. Probably most stuff here, and then sometimes like you just want to play some keys on a Prophet or like just have some sort of hands-on instruments. But this is totally not hands-on at all. It's kind of frustratingly deliberative, the whole process here. But I mean, but that's what that's what I wanted. Just something that's a bit more like a science lab, and then a kind of toy room uh, with uh, with the other guys.
Nice. I mean, congrats on the album, man. I've been playing it on loop for the last 2 days.
Nice.
It's I really like it, man. It's amazing. I mean, there's so much movement going on, and you know, although it's very light on drums. You know, there are some accents and some hi-hats floating around, but it's definitely not drummy. You know, but still, it's
Yeah.
very rhythmical and very punchy and very, there's it's a beautiful, nice balance between very punchy and very silky and very smooth at the same time. You know what I mean? There's plenty of hard hitting stuff, but really, yeah, it's really percussive in a way. The synth sounds are really percussive. But yeah, I was wondering about some of the stuff you're using because um, I think that do you have your neutron phaser or something like that? Because there's a lot of phasing going on, or is that an EQ thing or a modular thing?
There's I'm a big fan of phases.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I can hear that. But they're not. You're not using them with loads of resonance. It's just really sort of EQing and shaping the sound, right?
Yeah,
just making
more
move.
sort of psychoacoustic kind of use of it
Yeah.
rather than like too sort of wet. But actually, most of the phasery stuff is from this little. I don't know how to pronounce it. XAOC.
XA.
Chaos Devices.
Okay.
Carmen Yek, I think it's called, but it's a nice kind of modular analog phaser with a sort of two outputs. I think one output is 6 pole and the other is 8, something like that. So
right.
you can kind of pan them left and right, and it's gives you a nice kind of. But yeah, I mainly just use that on kind of effects things. So after a reverb or kind of processing sort of atmospheric stuff. Because if you put it on like a lead line or something that's kind of supposed to have a lot of punch, then you end up sort of losing some of the kind of punch somehow. I think.
Has it got MIDI? No, probably not.
No, it's got a little mini. It's got a little LFO in it. Otherwise, it's just audio in and output. But you can CV the LFO speed. But other than that, it's sort of fairly straightforward. But very nice sounding. Very kind of creamy, kind of smooth.
Yeah, it's all very silky. You know, that's what surprised me on the album. Because working with so much EQ and also so much dynamics, things can become harsh really quickly. But everything is very well balanced and very smooth. There are no frequencies that pierce your ears, or they are hurtful or stuff that It's all very nicely. How do you say that? Like smoothed out in some way. I don't know. It's very pleasant for the ears. Yeah, very pleasant for the ears. You know what I mean?
No,
in terms of frequencies, yeah.
Never been a particularly smooth sort of person. I'm sort of maybe making up for shortcomings in my personality.
Did you also send Joachim the 12-inch that they did? There's a pre-maxi of the album, which is also really, really.
I can stick one in the
really
in the
beautiful.
post.
It's a bit more rhythmic.
Okay, cool.
Than the album. So that mentioned.
No, I got sent the album only. I think, yeah.
Yeah.
I can update you.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Yeah. There was another thing I was meaning to ask you. Do you mind talking about your album?
Not at all.
No, okay. Because on the last track, the sort of the dubby one, it's or at least I call it dubby. There's this clanking sound. This it sounds almost like a steel drum, a distorted steel drum or something. Is that a source you recorded acoustically somewhere, or is it all synthesized?
That whole track was sort of made not really in the same. It was quite an old track that Alex, the label manager, was really sort of really wanted to sort of have on the record. But it came from a bunch of tracks that I was trying to do a really sort of dumb exercise of trying to synthesize sort of real sounding instruments and kind of ensembles. So I was trying to make some kind of realistic sounding instruments. I don't know what that was. I think I was trying to make some kind of distorted Rhodesy kind of sound, aiming at that Wurlitzer kind of, not really Wurlitzer, but I don't know, organ, kind of like a distorted broken organ kind of thing. Yeah, sorry,
I mentioned steel drum because that's one of my least favorite instruments, but there's a kind of ring to that sound, if you know what I mean. You know what I mean? It's like this.
Yeah.
clunky sound. Yeah.
You have to know how to use it, otherwise it starts to get annoying.
Yeah, I can't remember it was all done in the modular, but I can't remember anymore what that particular sound was. But yeah.
So it is synthesized.
Yeah, the whole track was sort of all synthesized.
And what is the process? Because I get the idea that in some tracks you have this kind of sequence going on, and then with all its modulations and stuff going on, and then do you write the chord changes in advance, or because it sounds like you make this kind of sequence, and then you kind of do the chord changes while that's already running. You know what I mean? Like sort of playing around. It sounds like it's played live actually. Like do you know what I mean? Like the chord changes sound very improvised, like kind of.
You've got it. I mean, it's like a separate sort of separating the process of writing kind of chords and rhythms. I do quite a lot, so kind of have a kind of chord pattern sort of in a mixer in the modular, and then run that into sort of filters and gates and LPG sort of dynamic processing sort of coming afterwards. So yeah, like making kind of the melodic and the rhythmic element parts of a track sort of separately.
Yeah, that's what it sounded like. Yeah, because I like the fact that it's very sort of it's very produced and very advanced in a way, the rhythmically, but at the same time it has this kind of improvised feel at the same time, so it's that kind of, it's a nice combination.
Yeah, I appreciate. It's a bit of a bit of both. It's always I always find the things that are taking kind of weeks to finish, really rarely like the best things. I don't know what you how you feel about that. Whether you have sort of long drawn out kind of tracks that you took years to finish, but
never know
your best. No, as fast as the
yeah. I usually I mean, the whole place here is set up in a way that, if you can see behind me, there's this area in the middle. It's basically just a desk with a bunch of patch blocks, like jacks that run straight into the sound card or to the analog desk.
Ah, nice.
And basically for every track or for every session, I just grab stuff from around the studio, and I build a setup for each one.
Ah, that's cool.
So it's like, I want to use these 4 machines, for example, today, and I make a chain of stuff and just jack it all into the computer, and it's clocked from the computer as well. And then everything is just basically multi-tracked into Ableton on the grid, because sometimes these setups become really complicated. I've done a couple of projects where the whole table was just one big tower of a massive patch, but as long as I can keep my head around it, it remains a very playable instrument, and that's, for me, that's key, because I don't like to sit in front of a screen, clicking around for ages and ages, trying to to make something out of sort of like an average idea. I'd rather just go back to the table and jam and hook things up and modulate things and record it straight to disc, and I find in my experience that whenever I do that, there's if you have a couple of hours of recordings that came together in such a way, there's always a couple of moments, maybe 3 or 4, which are like already the basic body of a piece of or a track, and then I can either choose to do some overdubs, or just go into into the DAW and edit some stuff around, and then I'll just call it a quits and just know, that's it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't spend ages, going into the meticulous details and trying to, I'm too impatient for that. I'm easily bored.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel the same these days. I think there's enough things to do on a computer that music making can happily exist outside of it as far as possible. But yeah.
What about you, Ashley? Do you work with hardware?
I started working with hardware, but a few things happened that I had to actually take the studio to bits. This was like years ago, like 15 years ago, and started working a lot more internally. In fact, to the point at one time I was just working on the tape, the table with headphones. So I got used to working inside, and I sort of end up going in. It always fascinates me when I see all this stuff like you're behind you, Sam, because I tend to just go in on a very small amount of plugins and just kind of I keep using that same machine over and until I almost exhaust it. I almost feel like it's a waste if I don't keep get everything I want out of it. So I never get as far as actually buying it or getting something new because I'm still trying to go through the stuff that I've already got, sort of thing. So I ended up being fairly comfortable working internally. So I mostly work internally. I have got a couple of bits and bobs, and I do plug things in from time to time, but it ends up being more of a headache by the time I've actually got everything how I want it. And like you were saying, Joachim, you've got everything at your fingertips. You can put it all on the table and set it up quickly. I'm not that organized. Maybe I just... It's interesting because you're saying the workflow, what you're trying to get is your creative flow. So we're all devising these different techniques to reach the flow state without getting too distracted, and that's what I've ended up working for me. Is I can get on and I can, using a smaller range of equipment. That's how I'm focusing my flow through in that way, kind of thing. And I design mostly everything myself. Any sounds I want, I'm using EQs and synths to just make it how I want it. So I can. It's just working with sound for long enough that I can, if I hear something I want, I know how I can replicate it using, just some basic synths, sort of thing. So that's kind of where I'm always testing. If I think, oh, that sounds interesting. I wonder how close can I get to that using just a small range of equipment. So like I say, always fascinates me these piles of modular stuff and all of this. I look at it sometimes. I find it a bit mind-boggling.
Well, I mean, you have a point in saying that knowing your instrument really well is definitely something that is makes your process faster, because if you have to sit down and sort of scratching your head about something, that doesn't really get anything done. Sometimes you have to, if you buy a new piece of gear or you have a new plugin or something, of course you have to familiarize yourself with it, but and take some time to get to know it. But yeah, I mean, really knowing your instrument is definitely key for the creative process, for sure.
Yeah. Because you don't want to get it's. However you find that method, it's just not wanting to be slowed down by getting down in technicalities. And however you find a way of avoiding that, that's kind of the key, isn't it? So you can actually just let the creative process do what it wants to do. Yeah.
I think sort of the fluency is more important than the amount of things that you have. I think you could do it with plugins as well. Like you can download so many, so many things that your menus
go down the rabbit
going off the
well.
off the page, and you never really get to know anything. But I find so many people that are just like, actually, more often than not, my favorite producers are always working in the box, and they're super productive, and they've just kind of got the smoothest sort of workflow within that system. And I also get the jealous pangs when when somebody's just kind of because it's a slow process, I think, working with hardware. Like you have to physically put all your stuff onto the table and plug it into the patch bay and make a lot of decisions even before you've kind of started making musical decisions.
But it's part of the fun.
Yes, yeah.
But it's part of the fun, so
like,
it's
yeah.
You can't sort of the results are I think we're all sort of tried enough different stuff to not dwell on the kind of like hardware sounds better than software or any of this kind of stuff, but it's just workflow and how quick you can get to results and how much fun you have in doing it.
I it's maybe it's a bit, I don't know if it's strange, but I can't fall in love with a plugin. I use them all the time, right? But I if you see a box or a synth, you actually develop a relationship with it, and you can actually fall in love with it. You can have this interaction with it, you can feel it and everything. And I don't know, I can totally obsess over hardware. I can really sort of, love interacting with a certain piece of machinery. You know what I mean? It's like, it just gets my juices flowing a bit faster than sitting behind a screen. Although I do spend a lot of time inside the box, but I don't want to get into the analog versus digital debate, because it's just all tools. That's how I see it. But
like Luke was saying when the other week, how he made the whole of Archangel in live,
right?
The whole entire album, which is always mind blowing when you think, I know he's got the capability to go any way he wants, or the capability, he has everything at his disposal, so he can. But he wanted to do it that way just to sort of test himself. And if you listen to the results, it's you didn't know. It's hard to. It's what comes through is his experience in creative flow and all
but
isn't
that like knowing your own sound palette, and then through years of experience finding plugins that match stuff that you've done before,
possibly.
Like if there's a certain synth that he used to use, and then in the end of the day, by your curiosity kind of like starts to match these sounds, knowing like, okay, this gets me the same result in terms of texture and stuff.
His approach is he just
I tend to do a lot of post-production now in the computer, and I'm fascinated by it. Although I have so much gear, and I would never want to work without gear, but I also would not want to drop the computer, because I think that the post-production phase is a whole different way of designing, a whole different way of taking the music to a next level, So I think it's nice to be able to know know the different worlds and then adapt to it in whatever situation you are. If you're able to collaborate with people, and then knowing both worlds is really comfortable, so you can switch from one thing to another. And after having done a lot in the computer, I'm always happy to get out of it to go back to the machines again. So it's a nice balance between the two things, and sometimes I realize that there's certain things that I can't make with my hardware, and then I do it with a plugin, and it's like, oh, see, boom, there's a like instant result. I find that really interesting to kind of use both worlds. But I can understand why you can do a whole album in Ableton and make it sound like previous stuff that you've done in your studio when you've made such a big catalog of music. And I think over the years, what your bass kick should sound like, and typical way of you're processing your hi-hats.
Yeah, and his personality is coming through.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's whatever tools you use, it's always going to be it's always going to bear your signature, right?
Yeah, and I think he has done so much different kind of music that he by now knows how to kind of create like a whatever project he's doing. You know.
I was the part that I find difficult when if I'm trying to do something just in the computer is that there's all these different tasks involved with making music, and there's sort of programming rhythms or melodies, and then there's mixing and arranging, and for me these are totally different kind of mindsets, and I like to sort of absorb myself into, you know, not thinking structurally or mix isn't important, just kind of get the sort of, you know,
going.
Yeah, without really thinking too much about it, and then just sort of jamming, and then you've got some sort of source material to then do the kind of thinking part of the track where you kind of arrange it a little bit. And so when I try and do something in a computer, it's like you're kind of programming a rhythm, and then it's like, oh, I'm going to EQ the kick, and then I'm going to maybe think about like, or, you know, you don't have this kind of clear zone of being creative on.
You're zigzagging around from these different.
Yeah, I find that kind of like attention switching kind of exhausting, or like I can't kind of focus easily on either sort of side of things. Like I wonder how you sort of handle that.
Yeah, because I actually don't mind that. It's interesting because they're all significant and they're all relevant issues. I don't mind it. Whereas for you, it's screwing with you, that's your. I don't know. You know, it's for somehow. It's like, okay. What I was thinking is sometimes I've worked in the studio and say the person I was working with, they're making all these noises from synth, and it's great stuff, and I might listen to it for half an hour, and I'm like, well, I could make 20 tracks out of what we've got in this half an hour. Whereas the person who's I'm with,
that's such an in the box attitude.
There's this synth here, there's this one, there's that one, but to me it's like there's this richness, there's so much in such a small. You could work in half an hour, and I could like I say, I guess it's different. It's just a different mindset. There's not a right or wrong way, and it's what works best for you. But totally, I'm like, well, let's do it. I can make a tune. I've got it all here. Like my head's sketching it out already. So don't start making up other ideas, because I'm just going to get overwhelmed with too many ideas, because it's like you're capturing the lightning in a bottle every 2 minutes. It's too much for me. But it's like I say, it's just that's how my creative head works, I guess.
Yeah.
But you know what? Like I have something interesting to add to what you're saying, because I totally agree. But like you've been making music for a long time, and you're saying like I was in the box kind of thing, and that was great. So all of your years of experience is in the box, which is equivalent to somebody has all these years of experience with hands-on hardware. So it's no difference. Your environment is as comfortable as for example Sam's environment being a true knob twiddler on the modular systems. And like I've done quite some teaching over the last 3 years, and the only thing that I experience with young producers is that because they start in the box and then they go to school because they want to learn to be a composer, or they want to take it to a serious level, or there is a reason for picking to go this musical education to learn something. And I have to say, the only thing that I find narrowing the mind of finding your environment is that they don't know where a sound comes from. Like they have absolutely no idea what a synthesizer does. So what you see is, like, if you listen to their tracks, is that everything is really kind of random, you know, and because they're stepping straight into the world of availability, which for them is amazing in a way. You know, if you can go into Ableton, you throw your sample in, you start to tweak and stretch and pull and whatever. But like I was trying to emphasize how important rhythm is, and there were a couple of people trying to make minimal techno, and there was just literally one kick, and I said, oh, that is not minimal techno because it's just one kick. And then I tried to emphasize how important song structure still is, and the usage of your drumming and variety in hi-hats, and how you can use several hi-hats to create one rhythm. And they were just looking at me like, well, where do I get the hi-hats from? I said, well, you can just create them yourself. And there was absolutely no knowledge, which I thought was really interesting, because that is
I wonder if it's necessary anyway.
Oh, when you heard the tracks, you thought it was really necessary. You know, because I think we were just discussing your album, and of course, we're kind of colleagues, aren't we? In our label colleagues, let's put it this way. So I've heard the album, and I know your work from the past, and of course, what you can clearly see is that there's so much exploration what you've done in your album, and we're talking about a whole different ballgame than somebody just taking a 909 and this hi-hat that goes like bam, bam, and then it's like, oh, maybe you want to try to use this or this, and they're like, that's what the sample pack gave me, kind of things. And these are like third-year students on a private school learning to be a musical composer, you know. So I think that's the only thing that I would like to throw into the debate. Like, there's definitely no right or wrong if you're an in-the-box producer or hardware genius or something. But I think that there's a
it's good to have an understanding of like where
exactly.
Well, you use the keyword. You used the keyword just now. I think you said it's about the exploration, and I think that's very, very true. You know, and even inside a computer, you can if for something like every DAW these days, like Ableton or Bitwig or Logic, have these internal patch possibilities, you know, with Max for Live and stuff like that. You know, you can do so much stuff, you know, trying to make things happen and, you know, automate things, or, you know, creating processes. You know, you don't really need hardware for that. You know, I mean, nowadays that's also possible inside most sequencers. So, you know, and going in, I mean, it's just there are times that I just go into Ableton and just try to build a system, you know, that does something, and just see what happens, you know, and put all these elements influencing each other, and see, you know, how far I can, you know, how far I can stretch it, and see if I can come up with some new sounds, or you know, in a way, so that's the fun part, you know, the exploration, the sort of you think in your head about some kind of signal flow, or, you know, a system that generates something. And without even knowing exactly what it's going to do, it's still, you know, just absolutely fun to work that way, you know, and to see what happens.
Yeah, sometimes not knowing is sort of an advantage. It kind of puts you in a more like easily excitable kind of state of mind.
Yeah, I mean the best moments are when you stumble upon something that you never be able to you know think up, you know,
or reconstruct,
or, you know, imagine beforehand. You know, you can imagine the process, or you can imagine the, you know, the kind of the range where it's going to go, but how exactly it's going to turn out, you never know. And I think that's one of the things that you know, gives you the spark and the excitement that makes you want to do something with it, or to finish it, or use it in some way. By the way, I should say, we are on YouTube. We can actually see the comments that people are posting. So if there's anybody listening or watching that has a specific question for one of us or to us all, then feel free to post it. And when we run out of ideas, then we can answer your questions.
What I was gonna say about what you said, Steffi, about kind of the importance of sort of understanding the sort of history of a sound maybe, and I'm kind of, I think it's super interesting to beat. On the other hand, like, you know, I wouldn't really consider that somebody has to understand the history of sort of splicing tape to use a sampler, or like if we can sort of simplify a lot of the technology for making stuff, then it's only a kind of a good thing, really. Like I get that, like I get where you're coming from. I think it's
I don't think they should be able to edit with tape like back in the day or anything, but like.
But the idea that it's sort
of. But
that,
you know,
that
when like we did a 3 days say like a mini academy, and the job was to create the sound and then pull it into your DAW and then start to make a track and process it in the way you would like to process it. And then there was just a simple synthesizer, and they looked at it and they have like, I don't know what I should do with it. And it's like, what is it that you normally do? I'll just go through all the presets until I find something, which is not a bad thing at all, because we all know that many old records have the first presets of a synth that came out, and everybody rinsed it dry, and then and then Joachim is laughing.
Guilty.
Same. But I think that is the only thing that would be nice to kind of like put in the middle as a kind of a thing to play with, like that it's interesting if you've got the option to every once in a while get a little bit of a feeling of what a synthesizer actually does, to be able to transport that knowledge onto designing in the box, especially if you're a young producer that hasn't got a budget to have a great modular setup as you have in the back, that at least they have felt it at some point and trying to get a little bit of a knowledge about synthesis, and then bring that back into using VST plugins.
I think with the modular stuff, there's a whole sort of really interesting culture of instrument makers, and probably the same for software people making kind of plugins and synths, but
it's amazing.
It's also like a really kind of interesting underground manufacturer kind of culture, with like people in their bedrooms soldering together like modules, and having sort of ideas and bringing them to life, and so it's kind of feels nice to support sometimes this kind of scene in itself, rather than just sort of I don't know. I bought a lot of old synths before, and kind of at the moment it's it's nice to kind of support these kind of people making new tools for us to use, in the same way that we're making things for DJs, and it's nice when they also kind of say like, thanks for making stuff for us, thanks for thinking about what we might want, and tailoring things for us.
Here's a question from Dylan. Hello, Dylan. Is this addressed to Sam? Is the rhythmic system? Yeah, go on.
Is the rhythmic system you're using to process synths using modular? Can you explain this a bit more? It's I guess it's a sort of paraphonic strategy where I kind of mix a lot of oscillators together, and maybe some sounds from outside, like from the Octatrack, have sort of banks of samples of chords and things in there, and then the sort of way I go about things usually is to build a big sort of wall of sound, and then have a second mixer for CVs. So mixing together a few different envelopes with different shapes, and maybe a slow attack envelope and a sort of punchy percussive envelope. Mixing them together. I could probably lift this up. And... Can we see anything here?
Yeah.
Like this guy is mixing sort of envelopes from this guy together. So then you end up kind of with a few different kind of percussive or kind of dynamic shapes for sending to LPGs is my kind of favorite dynamic module because it's sort of halfway between a filter and a VCA volume. So yeah, it kind of gives a nice percussive belly kind of tone. But yeah, the melodic and the rhythmic stuff are a sort of separate process.
So that's the mutagen, right? That you just showed us.
The mixer is the Mutamix.
Oh, the Mutamix. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's.
Do you sequence it, or do you manipulate it by hand, or what? How do you mix these signals then? The CV signals.
I just use it by hand. I've never.
Oh, right.
Never used it. Are you using modular as well?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I got my setup is on the left here.
Ah, nice, cool.
Ashley and I are going to take a break and come back in maybe 5 hours. And I'm like, oh my god.
No, but I know this module can also you can sequence between the inputs, right?
Yeah, you can. I like it as a sort of performance mixer for CDs.
Right. Okay.
So you can bring in different parts of the rhythm, and if you have kind of polyrhythmic stuff, it gets quite interesting with kind of having soft and loud hits at the same time in polyrhythm, and then when they both happen at the same time, they're kind of double the CVs kind of double, so you have kind of a third louder hit when they're both happening at once. Yeah.
Cool. Hey, Steph. Last time when we did when you were on after the stream, I think we talked about half an hour about your drum synths.
Yeah, and you tried to get hooked on the system.
Oh yeah, no. I mentioned the mutant hex inverter mutant modules. Yes.
I have to say, I was with one leg in that zone, and then I pulled myself back. I'm on like.
Your finger was hovering. Your finger was hovering over
the. and then Robin actually mailed me like, oh, you know what? I just wanted to give you some links, and this is the company, and this is the cases, or the caches, or whatever they call. And I just started to ask way too many questions, and then I pulled myself back. I'm like, wait, this is dangerous stuff. Maybe
no, but it's
maybe the kick drum. I'm not sure. Yeah.
No, but in a way, it's a very similar process that we are talking about now. You know, just shaping your own drum sounds, like Ashley was mentioning. You know, I mean, I don't have too many drum synths, but it's I love, you know, playing around with sounds, and you know, just it's much more easy to get a very nicely tuned ensemble than if you use samples, for example, you know.
Yeah, I think that was when I wrote my third album. That was a massive mission for me because the second album is a lot of 808 and 909 and a lot of extra percussion coming from the drum synths. But like the third album is like I want to throw all the very well-known drum synths into the corner and only design with the drum synthesizers, and it was so much fun. And then I got to get a bit carried away with it, and I kept on collecting them. collecting them, and now it's been the base for the way I produce music, and I think it's kind of similar to when you have these modules in a Euro rack, like similar kind of modules, you know, that can do can do fairly well. There's a little less patching going on, that, to be fair, but yeah, it's
and it has decent sized knobs, you know. These modulars, that's the only thing that sometimes can get really sort of you know, like finicky with the small knobs, you know.
I think what made it so special for me is that I started to work in detail much more than, you know, when I would use a typical kind of like kick, snare drum, 808, and it works on the dance floor. My God, you know, it's never been anything more powerful when you're, for example, making an electro track or using the 808. But like when I started to design my own snare drums, it became much more organic. Like the music really, you know, lifted itself up.
That was my my favorite of yours, because you're also sort of, you're not in any kind of familiar sonic palette, so I think it kind of comes through in the ideas on the record that you're not kind of, because as soon as you put in a few sort of hits on a 909, you kind of already know where it's heading. You sort of that's I know what to do.
Recognition,
but I think like could hear that you were like more like sort of not pinned down genre wise by that kind of approach.
And that was all around the same time when obviously Sam was helping me setting up my new studio. When we just decided to make everything as connectable as possible, you know, so all these drum synthesizers, well, if they have separate outputs, because some are old, so they don't have that, and then have them on the patch bay and actually being like, and that's what made it also very interesting for me, just like hands-on, like put an output on the patch bay and pull it straight through an effect and work with this, and it became so endless, you know, and that's, for me, it was a very important thing. So I started to collect them, and it's growing and growing. Yeah.
Did you get a Nord drum yet?
I've got 2 actually.
Oh,
that's ridiculous.
That's disgusting.
We were kind of. I hate to nerd out because it's kind of like, you know, but like after our session, when I first got invited by Joachim, later on we were like, oh, do you have a Syncussion? And I said, yeah, I've got an original. I got 2 clones, and he was like, oh, so yeah, it just happened. I can't help myself, you know. But that is a thing that I personally am obsessed with. Just have the availability, and especially in combination with the circle-on. If you're making a snare drum, like instantly layer a couple, and then start to tweak and tune until the right one sits, and then maybe create an artificial delay by using 2 little drum elements right after your snare drum hit, you know, instead of using a delay. And that's where it starts to get really exciting, you know, like there's all these little tricks, and because I have several here, I can just collect the drum sound so on demand, you know. I don't have to find or scroll through a map or like a folder of samples or anything. And it's supported my workflow massively. Like when I did my third album, I was like, oh, finally I made something decent, you know. Like I was finally happy with what was actually sculpting and yeah. Now I'm obsessed, like addicted.
I mean, you know, it's not the worst obsession in the world. By the way, the sunset is the color in your room is amazing now.
I could also turn my screen. It's not very special for the studio, but maybe for the sound. I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Wow.
I miss my stuff because I'm in a little studio now. My big studio is in Berlin. I I've got a Nord drum here, so that's why I have two. It's one in Berlin, one here. But yeah, anyway, that's the whole story of my addiction.
So in the meantime, I put in this question of Terry de Boer, Terry, and it's addressed to Ashley. So, do you want to talk about this? You've had some time to think about it.
I was just, relating it to what Steffi was just saying, because making all your own, drums and percussion or anything, that feeds into how I go about making my grooves. I guess everyone has a different technique. And also, when I first started making techno, all the stuff I didn't know, I was trying to figure out how to do it, and I was probably doing it the wrong way. But in that process of doing it, I learnt and sort of found new little techniques. So sometimes just accenting hi-hats instead of sort of just mixing them properly. I was just actually trying to accent, and so I sort of really got into the kind of detail of how to make everything move. So if I'm making a groove, I kind of attack it from all different angles, just in terms of detailed levels and the texture and the EQ. It's all happening at once, really. I don't know how everyone else goes about it, but I don't just say, well, I need this, this, and this. So it's sort of, I put elements start to come together, and I'll just play with them until it goes where I want it to go, I guess.
And
that makes any sense?
Yeah, sure. Is hypnotic something that is actually on your mind when you do that?
I think it's. I always have. For me, it's important to have some kind of grooves going on. I was talking the other day. I watched this film James Brown thing. And I thought, James Brown. Sometimes you forget that funk, and it seems to get forgotten a lot. But that's a big thing for me, having that kind of groove in there. And obviously, I was a big fan of it, as we all were probably, of Purpose Maker stuff when I was young. So that's always feeding into my influence. I guess, and Robert Hood, the way they put that kind of energy with such a small amount of stuff. So that's always an important thing. That's something that's always going on in my head when I'm making music. I guess it's one of those.
I find that really interesting that you're referring to Purpose Maker, because that's a lot of it is like disco sample based, what he did, and it's inspiring to me that you're telling me that's in the back of your head, and you're creating your own rhythm based on something that you respected back in the day, which had a completely different approach. And then you're translating into a new shape, which is totally. I think that's the strength of electronic music, that you're.
Well, I think to forget that all of that disco and funk and all those roots, it all goes back to that. And for me, it's important to understand that. I don't know, for me personally, I have all of that going on in my mind. I used to be really, I had my journeys into disco and all of that, sort of studying all that stuff and understanding where they influenced people like Jeff Mills, Derek May and things. So all of that feeds into, I guess, this sort of need for some kind of what I consider authenticity in what I'm doing. Or it doesn't mean that has to be the same for everyone. It's just kind of what means something to me, I guess.
Yeah, so, but it's beautiful that it kind of continues from his affection for Cerrone and Gino Soggio and all these and all these. His samples are pretty. If you have a disco collection, you can kind of pick it out and say that, cool. Sure. And then you can actually see how clever it's been done, and then you're taking. It's a chain. Like, it starts with these guys, and they were influenced by even older generations, and then it comes in your lap, and then and then you give it your twist, and there might be a young producer saying like, "Oh, listen, I want to do what he's doing," and then I'm doing my version of what he's doing. I think that's. I hope that that's going to continue, because I think that's the only way that like electronic music can actually progress by.
It's important to me always to look to understand where you come from. So it all feeds into where you're going as well. I think it's if you're just listening to the latest stuff and trying to make that, it doesn't give it, for me, it doesn't give enough context to what's going on. I like to know everything that's happening, and I'm always, I was listening to some of Joachim's early stuff, the other day, and I'm always picking at different eras, just to. Learning stuff that was made 30 years ago.
Yeah, I do. I tend to do the same thing, like to go back to old favorites and then kind of like listen to it in a different way or in a different mood, or and it's interesting because that whole UK kind of early breakbeat thing is actually all funk and there is that James Brown side, and it's funky drummers being sampled God knows how many times. But like if I listen to like 90 to 91, 92, especially UK stuff, like I'm like, Jesus Christ, the technique was so minimal, but what they've done with it was so clever, and that's
exactly.
Also just...
It teaches you, if you go and listen to funk stuff, it's teaching you just about rhythm and all of that stuff, and it's just, you think of how tight they were, that backing and Amacio and a Max and that, you just think.
A lot of those old drum kits were recorded just by a single mic, man. That's even the most astonishing thing, It's just a room and a mic, and then a really authentic sound. But I have another question for you, Ashley, because you're also a graphic designer, right? How
on and off.
Or okay. But how important are aesthetics for your work in music? Because if you're when you're doing graphic design, that's sort of the most important thing, right? Like the aesthetic of the whole thing.
I do think visually a lot about it. Yeah, I mean, at the moment I'm really into making videos, like to go with the music I've made. So because rather than getting someone else to do it, I want it to be relate to my thoughts with regards to the music I've made. So I'm actually putting a visual element in there, but that I do think a lot visually, because that's like that graphics side of my creative brain is always feeding in. But yeah, I mean,
do you use that when you arrange, when you're looking at your arrangement? Is that has any influence? Because it's funny, because I used to be a freelance graphic designer for years, when I had the ability to throw that out of the window and live off my music, and I see it benefits in even looking at arrangements. And
I don't know. I don't think of it as a painting in that sense, but I definitely have. My brain definitely thinks of things in terms of colours, the tech.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you synesthetic?
I don't know.
Oh, that's when your brain. Okay. When certain senses in the brain are combined or triggering each other. So I have a slight version of it because when I think of a sound, I can kind of see what it looks like,
Yeah, quite possibly.
And it's always the same. It's always the same, exactly the same. So if I hear a sound again, I remember it by the way it sounds, but also by the way it looked. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. Possibly. I definitely see things visually. I'm very visual. Yeah, I definitely see things visually in my mind.
Yeah.
A lot of the time. In fact, everything's visual.
There's a question for Steffi from Lennart.
How important are chords for you, and what's your approach on using them? First of all, that depends on the type of music I'm making, but when you say chords, that I relate that instantly to melody, which is the most important thing in my music, because that gives gives the recognition to the music. Like the melody makes the music recognizable. If you got a strong melody line, the next time you hear the track, you have that like, yeah, I have heard that before. So, and it's interesting because sometimes I want to make really dark and mean music, and then I've got I always call it the pizza dough rolled out, and it looks solid, and I can start throwing the ingredients on it, and then I've layered some stuff, and I'm like, something's missing, you know, like I don't know what it is, and then I start fiddling around, and next thing I know, there's chords and strings on it, but out of the window with my dark, mean techno or whatever it is. So yeah, for me, it's the foundation of my music. Like I always have to fall back on a strong melody. It's hard for me to design music that hasn't got any melody, and chords are, of course, a very big important thing. I do have to say that I try to keep. It's a new challenge for me to keep the melody really small as possible. Like earlier in my musical journey, I was trying to layer as much as possible, and it would get really messy to mix it in the end of the day. And now I'm trying to also strip down the melody and see if I can get it as strong as possible by not using too much elements. And it's of massive importance. Like my music doesn't function if there's no chords or strings. I hope that answers your question, but yeah, massive importance.
I like the pizza analogy.
Yeah, that's my way to work. But you know the feeling, like when you've got the foundation, like the kick is there and the rhythm is there and everything's there, and you're like, right. And then for me, that's a moment of like, right. Whereas for some people, it's like, it's done. And it's very hard for me to distance myself from rhythmic tracks. And some people, I believe it or not, but I have a lot of techno in my computer that has never seen any daylight. And those are just, for me, are just sketches. And every once in a while, I'll pull something out and maybe do something with it. But it hardly ever gets to see the daylight, because for me, it feels like it's unfinished. And maybe that's also like a thing that I can't let go, the fact that it hasn't got a melody. And maybe I should just at some point throw it out, but it feels really naked to me, you know, because that's my layer. Like, okay, the pizza dough is done, and the bottom is nice and crunchy, and now we need to get all the fancy shit on. So yeah, it's quite funny.
I'm sort of impressed. I have a kind of similar inability to sort of like leave things just so bare, but I do really admire when people can kind of make a track or make a pizza dough that's like so good you don't need anything on it.
I love it that you're
Pizza Bianco.
Yeah, pizza Bianco. I love that. And that's what they serve in a good restaurant, in a good Italian restaurant. They serve the crispy kind of bread in a basket with a pinch of salt and some rosemary or whatever, and that's already amazing. But I'm a bit afraid that people might get hungry if they only get served.
You make the kind of like the deep pan kind of pizzas.
Deep dish.
Call them, like
But I maybe I should at some point. I mean, it has crossed my mind to do more like dance floor stuff that is very stripped, and then maybe use a different name or something. You know, I don't know. Like I have lots. It just never sees the daylight. In general, I have like tracks and tracks and tracks. But it's probably the same for you guys, like that never come out because they're just part of a family. Like if you would, I don't know if you guys relate to this. If you do a 12-inch. That has like 4 tracks, you have at least 8 that never. You have 8, and then you pick 4, and the other 4 kind of stay there. No, or is that just me?
No, it's true. Yeah, it's true for me as well. But I want to go back to what you said about the pizza layer kind of thing, because it's interesting your mind works like that. Because in my mind, it doesn't work for me like that. You know, it's. I listened to the whole thing, as an aesthetic, or a sort of like a sound, or like a world, you know what I mean, like and even the I don't really literally write melodies. Well, sometimes I do, but also if something suggests a melody or something, kind of. I like stuff where your brain has some room to interpret still. You know what I mean? Like, if you are too obvious sometimes, or if I'm too obvious sometimes, I think it is too much, because there's no room for interpretation. I like music where there's still some room for interpretation, if you know what I mean. Like.
But it's interesting that you say this, and I'm dying to know if this is something that developed, or because if I listen to your earlier stuff, it's very melodic to me, or am I misinterpreting the music? Because like the early
No,
albums are very melodic. Did you kind of distance yourself from this because you wanted to strip yourself down and then let the listener do the rest, or is that just a development?
no, I think you're right about the early stuff, but I mean that's just me figuring out synths and drum machines, and that's just.
I would not want to call it this, but yeah.
No, but I mean I mean I mean around that time, basically, the only way to really make music was to have just like pre-computer age, you know what I mean? So that you had to use hardware and sync things up, by MIDI or sync or whatever, and without too much outboard processing, that's the sound you get. That's just the sound you get when you use these machines. But as sound design options became more advanced and easier to incorporate, things became a bit more sonically more complex, I guess. And because I did a lot of stuff where it's quite recognizable where the sounds are coming from, I kind of switched to a way of working where it's not so obvious where things are coming from or what's actually happening. I like that idea. If you listen to something and you really can't tell what the sources were. And that's, I don't know, maybe that's just a false sense of accomplishment, to myself. But I like to. I usually go for an aesthetic more than for a melody or a tune. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I'm just thinking because Ashley, like one of your earlier, maybe one of the first records that you were doing, it was, to me, it was also still very melodic type of techno, if I'm allowed to call it like this. And then later on, you were also a little bit more percussive. Is that correct when I'm
possibly
saying this?
What are you thinking of? I mean, my first, I've done a variation. I do sometimes put more kind of sort of melody and things in.
Yeah.
Maybe. But yeah, again, it's I'm trying to. It just have to feel. It has to feel right. It doesn't have to have it or not have it. It just has to.
So it has to
yeah, it just have the right feeling.
But I think like if you talk to people that are making music for like maybe 10, 20, 30 years, the question is what like how do you reinvent yourself? Is that necessary? Do you stick to a certain formula? Does your curiosity brings you into different corners? All that kind of stuff. I mean, for me, before I explained about the drum computer thing, and that opened up a whole new world. So those phases also have influence on what my music sounds like. I think that probably everybody goes through that kind of stuff, no?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, you get bored of things. I think most kind of modules that I've used kind of excessively have got rid of at some point. Like even though they were kind of good at what they did. You're just kind of bored of
The same
the
thing.
kind of familiarity of it. And my favourite synths are Pro One, and they've just been sitting in my cupboard for years now because just I don't want to get rid of them. I'm sort of sentimental.
Don't.
But
But it's fair to say that like when you did your solo album, that it really kind of revealed what your comfort zone was and what your own sound was. Like you've been, of course, making lots of music with Barker and Baumacher. When you dropped the solo album, it was very clear where you were at as you with your studio and your synthesizers. Like I've known your music and also what you were doing solo here and there, and then when you came with the album, it's like, oh wow, yeah, that's a whole journey of you being very comfortable with what you use as equipment, you know. Like that's that's the impression that I had, you know, when you finally came out with that album. Like, wow, there's a very consistent line in how everything sounds together, like how you've put it together and what you've been using and how it's been produced. You know, it's not just like stuff you've done over the years that were like from different studios. Like you can clearly see that there's a work environment that everybody gets a little bit curious about. Like Jochen was asking you, like, oh, how did you do that? How did you do that? You know, it's interesting how the studio can have such big effect on what the outcome, in the end of the day, what the outcome is. You know?
It's very true. It's very true that the place where you record your stuff, you know, the vibe of your room and you know, the way it sounds and everything has a big and how you feel to being in that room, that does have a big impact on your productivity, you know. And on that subject, Sam, you know, I had some old synths sitting around for ages that I didn't touch for a few years, but when I moved to a different room, maybe 4 years back now, when I moved here, I started using them again and completely rediscovered them. You know, I fell in love with them all over again. So it's I mean, at some point you have enough. You basically the distance you had with this synth is enough to be able to completely see it as a fresh new machine again. You know what I mean?
What were the synths, or what was the gear?
Especially with my System 100, I have this the System 100. You know, the gray one, not the 100M, but the sort of I think it's 10. Yeah. It's like it's got 2 synth units and then a mixer and a sequencer and 2 speakers. I had smaller speakers in my other room and didn't quite hear the range of the instrument, but now I'm here, and I have a sub which goes, yeah, that's the one. Thanks,
nice.
Sander.
Yeah. That's a quick boom.
That's Sander in the background, you know, sneaking in the picture. But anyway, so yeah, when I got the sub to work here, and I put it back in the mix, you know, like back in rotation of the synths I'm using. I completely rediscovered it. It's I saw a question earlier coming by. What is your favorite bass synth? Well, for me, that's the one. It's incredibly powerful in the bottom end. You know, it's just absolutely beautiful. It's very round, very. You can make it sound almost like an acoustic bass. You know, it's got so many subtle variations in how, you know, although it's like very, very simple waveforms. You know, it's just a square and a saw wave and a sinus wave. But if you combine them and you kind of have, you know, things sort of influence it a little bit. You know, you can get incredible, pure and very powerful bass sounds out of it. There's nothing that goes as deep as that one. It's crazy. and I never knew
System
it.
100,
I never.
is that what you're saying?
Yeah. It's. I mean, if everybody knows the sound of a 101, it's kind of in. If you listen to it superficially, it's kind of in that range. Like the old Roland synth sounds. But this one goes so much deeper. It's just incredible. It's really beautiful.
Nice.
I wasn't ever selling it though. I mean, it's just got it was just less used than when I first got it, and I thought I kind of exhausted it, but now I'm here. It's been in the setup for most of the stuff that I did here.
Yeah, I think so long as I got space to hang on to stuff, I'll probably, and depending on how long we end up sitting on our asses in our studios, maybe that's kind of emergency rent payments. But yeah, I think there will be a time when I'll get back into sort of the older stuff.
Well, it's compatible with what you. It's compatible with what you're running. I mean, the Pro One is CV inputs, right?
I
think so.
CV and gate and a filter input.
Yeah. Pro One is amazing. I mean, the modulation on the left side of the panel, the kind of matrix, it's crazy. Very versatile. Very good for drum sounds too.
Yeah, it's you can. I made lots of drum samples with it. I used to use it with my favorite part of it is the audio input. You can use it to trigger the sequencers. So I used to play with a drummer who we'd just sort of mic up the snare and the kick, and he would play sort of add two of them, and he'd play a sort of bass line with his kick pedal and kind of melody stuff with the snare. Just put two sequences in on each of them, and it kind of he was kind of a jazz drummer, Jim.
Jim the jazz drummer.
Yeah, Jazzy Jim. I never called him that.
Jazzy Jim.
But it was super fun kind of to integrate into live setups like that, into band setups. But
it's interesting. It's interesting how you just said audio in, and that made me think about what we spoke about, Jochem, after the other not Twiddler session, about running a known drum computer like a 606 or an 808 through like the main output through a whole different effect box, and then see what it does and how you can.
Well, yes, separate outputs. You mean because that's I use
whatever. I don't.
Yeah, I that's what I do quite a bit. Separate out all the instruments and build like a whole chain of stuff like with pedals or filters or whatever or EQs, and then I mean, I don't mind if it sounds recognizable, but depending on what you put in your chains, you can make it sound completely unlike the signals that are coming in. Yeah. And it's a very quick way of getting things going, because you have these chains which are very all by themselves. They're very simple chains, but the variety of the sonic range you can get out of it, of each one, is just incredible if you choose the right elements in the chain. So you can, by just a few tweaks, you can completely change the sound into a completely different direction. So it's like just extending the parameters of the instrument, because I mean these old Roland boxes, they have some parameters, but they're very limited. The range isn't so big. And instead of having them modified and drilled into, I'd rather do it on the outside and but it's about the speed at which you can work like that. I mean, if you have an analog rhythm or an octatrack, you can manipulate the sounds beyond recognition very quickly, also inside the box. But that's not possible with these old drum machines, you know. So yeah, and I like the process, you know. Just have because the programming is very quick, you know. You know, you can get things going very very quickly because it's just a very limited sequencer. But then you have this enormous you know, range of sonic possibilities with a very simple setup, and yeah, I mean that just works for me, you know.
Is that what you do inside the box actually? Like you have loads of change when you make your drums and you process your
Yes,
audio.
yeah, basically, yeah. I just you know, have a lot of different things that I know I can do to get the sound to sound how I want it to sound. Like, yeah, basically. So it's I might put a lot on the one channel that's creating that sound, and then I might bus parts of that sound to more than one bus as well, depending. So it's I can almost get into every kind of part of the dynamic range and affect little parts of it, or take portions of the sound and layer those just all off of one sort of sample. So I mean, you know, even if it might be a samples of, I don't like this, you know, I big you know, banks of samples. I work with just a smallish selection of sounds, and I just know I can take that basic. I just think of it in my head as it's a waveform, so I'm just manipulating it into a different shape to make the sound I want, sort of thing. Especially with percussion, I can really just force that wherever I want it to go. You know, I can turn a kick drum into a hi-hat, or, you know, like,
yeah, sure.
Whatever you do, it's just push it with it, you know, with it, you know, if you're working digitally, you know, you've got so many. You just keep throwing stuff at it if you wanted, you know, to another EQ and another EQ until you've just forced something that was a low frequency sound to a high frequency sound. If you,
yeah, right.
If
as
you
long
want
as your
it.
computer holds it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, so I just know I can. If I hear, definitely with percussive sounds, if I hear something, I know my brain just starts working out how I can make that, you know, recreate that sound. So it's like sound just basic sound design, really. So do
you use mainly the built-in plugins, or do you have any favorite?
No, I lose some of the built-in. I'm using a retro synth on Logic quite a lot, but I've got some Korgs, stuff like this. I'm really into sort of just the MS-20. I'm really exploring that at the moment, you know. But again, it's that sometimes I'm using that, and then but I'm adding stuff to it as well. So it no longer. I'm combining it with other plugins and creating my own.
You mean layering them?
Not necessarily layering them, but I might use an external arpeggiator or other effects to make it more dirty, you know, dirty it up, or send portions of it to buses to make it sound dirty, so as if I'm pushing it through chains of processing to make it sound more than it just the synth on its own, or I can try and work within the actual parameters of the synth, and then once I've got the sound, then I'm processing it more. I do that quite a lot, actually, if I'm trying to make things richer or, you know, more textured. So I've got different kind of methods I use to do that, and like I say, I might just take small portions of whatever's being generated and just process that small portion of the dynamic range. You know, I just push a bit an EQ, a small part of the EQ through a bus. You know, does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I'm just slicing. I'm just getting this, make it a noise, and then I'm just going into dynamics of it in detail, in a way, to get it how I want it to sound.
So you're a sculptor.
Yes, absolutely. That's how I always see it. It's like sculpting. Yeah. Right. And it might be something to do with my mastering background, working in an EQ sense. Everything's and especially when I was learning how to, when you first starting, when I first started, the guy, the 20 or 30 years experience in the room next door would go, shh, I'm doing something delicate, or they put like half a dB on some part of the thing, and I'd be like, I can't hear that. What you're doing, like you're just making it up. You're pretending you can hear that. Whereas now I can hear it. I just put, I can put, or less, and I can pick out where it is because it's your ears get trained. So I guess going through that process really got me keyed into that. But I guess it's presumably similar for everyone. But
no, it totally makes sense. Yeah, it's funny how half a dB on or off can be the difference between something sounding very wrong and very right.
Yes,
it's crazy. It's yeah, you're right. I mean, if you would have somebody next to you with untrained ears and you would say, listen to this and listen to the difference, it wouldn't make sense. But it actually could mean to myself, the difference between something shitty sounding and something sounding exactly right.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. But it's very, I definitely didn't. I wasn't sold on it. At 19 years old. It takes a little bit of time to, like you say, to train your ears, and really understand what's going on.
It's just when something is sticking out, which is not pleasant, that is, you know what I mean? Like it has a ring or some kind of problematic area or something that it just doesn't feel right, in the context of everything else.
Yep.
Yeah, in the context of everything, or it's just eating away a lot of energy from a certain area. And just dipping that little half a dB or something could make a world of difference.
Yeah, no, definitely.
When you master, do you do that inside the box as well?
I prefer to take it to a studio and sit with a second pair of ears if I can, if I've got that luxury. But or I can do basic mastering inside. It depends, but you can't really get. I mean, unless you've really got some professional stuff. I don't know. There are plugins where you can get level but I don't know. It is nicer, isn't it, to get it to just at least let it see some sort of analog, to get it out of there and in again. It's nice to be able to do that. So if I can, if I can, I prefer it to be mastered in a professional.
Right. Yeah, and the second pair of the second opinion kind of thing about it is. Yeah.
Although, like I say, I'm not as bothered as I may have once been, but it's just experience. But
I think the second opinion's more important than the.
Because sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees, and you can get to that stage.
Totally.
Yeah, you get some elements, maybe something that you are very proud of or are attached to, emotionally or whatever, when you were working on it, and then you're not capable of clearly making the trade-off, because you might not be so radical to sacrifice something that you
end up getting it too precious.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean.
But actually, having said that, I've also been in a situation which I'm sure you have, when you've got back you've put your sort of trust in, got back, and then sort of like something's niggled you and you thought, actually, I'm not happy with what they've done, and the track's gone out. I've actually been, I've had stuff that I think actually, I've listened to my version, like say a year later, and thought actually that my unmastered version's nicer. So they don't know everything.
It's not easy finding the right mastering studio that is compatible with the type of music you make. I find it not so easy.
It does help if they need to be experienced, definitely, because it's like we're saying, it's one of those things. It's so delicate sometimes.
It seems like they're kind of developing a style of their own. Which
to be honest, I think a mastering engineer shouldn't really have a sound. I mean, there are mastering engineers that do, and that's great. But to be honest, in my mind, it's more like a technical thing. You make sure the levels are okay. The tracks have if you do an album or an EP, that the levels are, make sense between the tracks, and that there is not anything, yes, like annoying or something that hurts. Or even if you're mastering for vinyl, you should make sure the all the technical things are taken care of, like monoing down the bass and roll off the highs a bit, stuff like that.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people are now kind of having issues with the industry standards. That some. I mean, we've already kind of survived the maximizing carnivalesque kind of loudness that was going on for a while, but
volume was.
Sorry.
The volume was, you mean?
Yeah, but like when everything that came back was just a block. There was no dynamic anymore. That kind of stuff is kind of behind us. But I find it like for my labels, I have to sometimes switch because it just doesn't make any sense anymore at some point. Either they're very busy or they're all doing the same kind of trick that works for a typical kind of sound, and then for another type of music it doesn't work. Like I think I've worked with so many different kind of mastering studios, not for my own music, also for my own music, but most of the time for the people, artists on my labels. But it's just it's extraordinary how much influence it has on the music. I'm a bit shocked there. Jochem, you say like, oh, I shouldn't have a character, but I think in a lot of times it has too much of a character. Like when you get a track back and the whole tonality of your snare drum is completely different, and you're like, okay, you've corrected a frequency there, but like there's pulling and pushing to a certain extent that has way too much influence on the sonic, basically on how it should sound. Like I don't think that a master person should start to push or pull so much that you have a completely different pitch snare drum in the end of the day. I think that's a point where you feedback the artist and say like, listen, I think there might be some trouble in the mid-range or mid-high range and I have to push it or take it down. But sometimes I get stuff back and I'm like, it's a whole different track, I don't know if you guys have the same.
Well, I mean, there are some mastering engineers that we worked with, or because I've worked with loads of them, and I mean, for the only the really experienced and talented ones can have a sound. For example, what his name? Stefan Betke is somebody who has a real. His hearing must be, supernatural. I don't know, but everything that he masters sounds, so well proportioned. It's so well balanced and just perfect dynamics and nothing hurts. Everything is smooth and I don't know, that is certainly a sound. But I don't know. I mean, so I also think that you should just pick the one that understands your music, and you build a relationship with the mastering person, and
But it's not easy if you're releasing music from other people and you have maybe like 30 artists on your label, and then some like this and some like this, and to get somebody that masters like really natural. Then for some people it's like, no, I want this and I want that, and then I find that it's a little bit too much of a mass production kind of vibe sometimes. Like you can hear that the mastering has been done very quickly, and then you can, it doesn't really. Sometimes I just wonder like what kind of decision was made when I get the tracks back, and especially for other artists like.
You let artists pick their mastering engineer?
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes when it's really important for them, because I always approach it from my perspective. I would like to pick my studio if I release music. Yeah. And sometimes people are, okay, we're working with this, and then you write down your instructions of what it should sound like, and that's how you discover other mastering studios, or when you do a remix, and most of the time the label has a mastering studio picked because the original artist wants to be mastered by that studio, and then you see what they do, so that's a way to learn about new mastering studios. But like, if the artist has a favorite, I'd like to cater that. I don't want to be deciding for them where they should master, because it's so personal. Who am I? I mean, unless it's really expensive, then I'm like, listen, I can't afford it. But other than that, why not? Like, you might learn something every day when you're working with new people. So I think it's okay to have them choose. I would want to do the same thing.
What about mixing?
I wish.
What about mixing?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean give it to other people? Giving mixing to other people? Is that what you mean? The mixing job?
Yeah, mix downs, like outsourcing.
Have you done that?
Do that.
I never have, but I've done it for other people a little bit, and yeah, I mean, it's a luxury. I would say that's something, a part of the process that is extremely important. I've kind of, I don't have a problem with doing it, but it's the kind of focused, hard work at the end of a track where you kind of drive yourself a little bit mad because you've got something that you need to
but
finish.
do you really separate it that much from the writing process? I mean, do you really just only think about writing? Because in some way it's kind of still part of the same process, right? Because you're leveling your things as you go, right? Or
I mean, there's a degree of it, and it depends how complicated things get. But I always try and leave myself with as little work to do as possible at the end in that sense, with mixing and editing. But yeah, you do a bit as you go along, but I try not to get kind of sucked into kind of the mix whilst the idea is not kind of proven itself to be good or not. You're mixing kind of something that maybe you don't want to use in the end, perhaps, or I don't know.
So
sometimes you can just like completely pull it apart, and then you're mixing it back, and then you listen to a previous version, you're like, oh, where did I go? Like sometimes, like when you're leveling during your arrangement process or whatever, and sometimes it sits well, but you're like, oh, but listen, I have to be careful of this frequency and this, and then you start to push and pull, and then the end result sounds unnatural. Do you know what I mean? Like you're like, oh, I'm not happy, but I'm happy with the mistakes that I made because it sounds better for some reason. I'm terrible at mixing, but the more knowledge I gain, the more it kind of, I start to get too pragmatic about it, and then I seem to lose the dynamic of the track. So I would love to have somebody do it for me who's really good to understand.
It's also, there's the thing to be said for it, like another pair of ears.
Yeah, I don't know, because
I've also DJed so much that, to be honest, like I've got a hearing loss. It's not a secret, like there's certain things that I can't hear, unfortunately, because I've been DJing like for 25 years, and nobody taught me 25 years ago that I had to put my monitors down. You learn while you grow old, and then it's already too late. Last time I was at the doctor's, I'm like, I'm never coming back because they're gonna give me such a hard time. And it's like, there's nothing I can do. The damage has already been done. So
how bad is it?
Yeah, not good. It's not good, but I don't know if Have you? I mean, to be fair, it's years of certain clubs that don't want to adjust their sound system. Sam, you might probably know what I'm talking about, and then you get trouble in certain frequencies because it's just. I think it's also the ears are getting exhausted from traveling too much. It would be very interesting to now have them tested after not flying and traveling, you know.
Yeah, maybe some of it has come back. Yeah.
And let me tell you one thing. I used to be a big drinker, and that fucked up my ears, you know, pretty bad. And I stopped that, and only on the fun occasion, I like to drink a little bit, but like that made a massive impact on my ears. Like, so when I stopped drinking, it's like, ooh, I can actually wake up without my ears being all over the place. So I think when we were young and we didn't really care about the future and we were partying and in the middle of it, like, yo, and then all of a sudden you're like, Jesus, now I've got a tinnitus and this is happening and this is happening, you know. I don't know if anybody has the same problems, but I definitely have it. So
I have a permanent tinnitus, but since about 20 years, I think. But to be honest, if I don't think about it, it's not there, you know.
It's not there, yeah.
Yeah, and also we were just talking about a trained hearing, you know. I have absolutely no problem at all judging what I'm doing sonically in the studio. So I you know, I can still fully hear everything. I don't know. I mean, it's of course your hearing deteriorates, you know, while you get older. But I still feel very much capable of judging what I'm doing. I don't have. It's not bothering me in writing music or listening to music or listening to music or mixing down music at all.
But you know,
know,
when you're getting really fanatic about like getting the best result and then you're like, oh, it would be so nice if it would sound like a specific kind of record that you know that has been mastered in an amazing way. It's like,
but yeah, never compare your studio with mastered records. Never do that. You know,
that's know, but like in terms of like getting the end result, and there are references that you want to. Like if only my record could sound like this. There's no harm in dreaming, you know. Like what is it that
I don't think I'll never stop. It doesn't matter how good a record I make, I'll never stop thinking that.
Yeah, well,
I always hear something else and think, how have they done that now? You know, like I'm always something for me to learn. I don't think I'm ever going to be quite happy.
And if you would ask them, they would tell you, I have no fucking clue how I did that.
Yeah, pure luck. Pure luck. Exactly.
But on the mixing thing, personally, it's to me, it's this kind of music. Certainly, the sort of music I'm making, it's part of the expression is my choices in the mix. So I wouldn't want to have another engineer mix it because. It's not. It's like I was having this conversation before, and with Chris from Token said, he goes, imagine what the bells would sound like if someone else, if you'd ever had another engineer, you know, it wouldn't sound like the bell. So, which I thought was a good way of putting it. It's to me, it's a personal expression with this particular music. I was making. Like more of a pop record, maybe. You know, it's nice to have another input. And some of the stuff I did with Underworld, we've got this. Rick's got another guy that we're all putting a little bit of ideas in and doing very fine tunes to it. So it's nice to have that input. But for just the sort of raw stuff that I'm making for dance floors, I prefer to personally for it to all be my decision.
But do you ever look back on your music and you just go like, oh, I wish I would have done that differently? You know what I mean?
No, I mean not me. I mean, no. I mean, of course you can think about it. It doesn't annoy me, you know. It's of course if you would do the same piece of music, you know, later, you know, you would interpret it in a different. Yeah, you would have done it. Yeah, any moment other than the moment when you made it would have made the track into something different or sounding different. Yeah. But on having other people mix your stuff, I usually it would be very difficult for me because during the process of layering things and sort of stacking things on top of each other to build like a sound, like a track, some of the effects that you really like or really that really get you going about this sound that you are producing, might not even be the individual sound. Might not be
It's a
just be
combination of
exactly, yeah, how
I know
sounds
what you're
work
saying.
together.
Yeah,
And
I
if
know
you
what you're
if you
saying.
if you even change the levels between 2 or 3 sounds a little bit, the whole effect or the whole
Yeah, it's
groove or the
true.
whole intention changes, and
Yeah.
and I think if you leave that up to another person, they might not even
Know what it should sound like. Yeah,
know what you had in
you only
mind,
know. Yeah,
what
exactly.
was the exact thing you were thinking while you were building
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
and it's funny how sound works like that. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's you take out one little piece that is not even that loud, and the whole thing falls apart. And so I think sounds help each other being, or sitting in the right place, or they help each other achieve a certain effect, and or a certain thing, your aesthetic or mood you're after. And once you destroy the balance, then you lose that thing, that got you going in the first place. So I think, for me, I haven't tried it. I might as well try it sometime, but I haven't done it so far. No, but I mean, that's the thing. It's such a delicate
It's
balance
very
between,
personal. Yeah, it's true.
yeah, and it's so delicate. Why you are excited about this piece of music or piece of the work that you've been doing. It might just be completely gone if you give it to somebody else for mixing. I don't know.
Yeah, it's true though.
I mean,
know what you're saying.
apart from we can all think about better setups than we currently have. Like if you have like I don't know, like 32 Neve preamps, and if you would have it to your disposal, you would of course, uh, you know, have more sort of sonic sculpting possibilities, or like I don't know what name your favorite outboard. I don't know, but I think. Yeah, I don't. The reason for me to give something away to somebody else was to have access to gear that I don't have myself. That would be the only reason, that I want a certain sheen or a certain vibe from a compressor that I don't own or something. But other than that, I can pretty much get everything done.
I think it has
by
to be somebody that relates to your music, or that you know, or that you've worked with, or that you start a good working relationship with, that understands exactly what you're doing. It could work, it could be beneficial, but then I completely relate to what you're saying. Like if one sound is made from 3 different like channels influencing each other, and then if you would have to bounce them separately, and they would have to correct certain frequencies and then completely pull out the life of it, then it makes no sense. I think it's a very delicate thing. I've never tried it, but sometimes I dream of the perfect mix and think, oh, how would it be if somebody else would mix it? But then what you're saying makes complete sense, and then makes me want to throw my thought overboard and be like, hey, whatever.
I think Ashley's right that it is like a big part of, especially like techno and music that's played on big high fidelity sound systems. Production is the, I mean, that's the, like, timbre is the thing that's evolving in music, really. Like that's the thing that defines an era rather than rhythms or melodies. It's so it's sort of, it is a key part of your sound. But I mean, I think I work a little bit like Steffi, and like recording sort of multi-track jams, and then kind of like having to go into that and edit. I'd love to give somebody just 15 minutes of multi-track, and then you get sent back.
See what happens. Yeah.
Yeah, like that would be kind of
But in terms of
my ideal process collaboration.
or in terms of mixing.
Just like there's some good bits in that, I think, and then maybe maybe there's a good bit towards the end,
Ooh, I would love to do that
Like-
with you.
but see.
But
see
that's
what you
almost a
think.
producer's.
That's
That's
like a
almost a
remix
producer's job,
thing,
you know,
no?
like
Yeah.
pointing out the strengths of something in something you've done. It's more like a producer's role than a mixing engineer's role, right?
Or a remix role, maybe.
I guess I'm just being really lazy right now. Because you get your process really sort of fluid and quick, and then you think like, I'm going to make so much music now with this super slick process, and you do, but not all of it's great, and you're quick. So
Yeah, but isn't
you
the
get
struggle
it
wonderful,
sort of-
man? It's
Oh,
got to
yeah.
be some kind of struggle going on, right? I mean,
Yes, that's so good that you're saying this. That's
There
so
has,
true.
optimizing is, I can see from your studio you're into optimizing, and getting things as sort of convenient as possible, at least.
But I know a little bit how your head works, Sam. So maybe it's also something that you might get lost in, or something like. There's so many options, and then somebody might kind of simplify it. Is that what you're saying? Like, oh, take that part, put it there, and then this sounds
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, it makes sense.
I think
Yeah,
I think I'm good at sort of having fun in the moment, and then the kind of after the event analysis, where it's sort of, I can really be like, oh, this is good. Oh no, this is really not good. This is terrible. In the space of listening to the 10 minutes that you just recorded, and
Yeah.
and it's that kind of thing for the right person is super easy to be like, oh, this bit, that's great, yeah.
Yeah.
Just cut this
I
bit out.
think you're talking about
do something
producing.
with
Yeah.
It's about the sort
That
of really warped emotional relationship you have with the things that you record, and how a totally clean, cold analysis from somebody you trust that is into what you're doing, I guess can have probably a much better, for me at least, somebody like that has a much better sort of perspective for me. Like yeah, I don't know how, if you guys have your sort of self sort of judgment in check, or
I've learned to be quite instant with that. I've no problem dismissing something at all, or bin something. But also judging when something is worth keeping. That's totally instant with me. I know. The second I hear something, whether it's something I want to continue working on, or that I want to use, or if it's useless for me. That is a very, very instant thing for me, very, very quick. So I never spend ages thinking about it, or doubting things or anything. It's either yes or no.
Yeah.
That's a good mindset.
It has to sit right, and then then you can move on. Like when I was younger, I used to loop, and it would drive me nuts. And now I always say to myself, I do, like, when I go into the studio, I do 3 jams a day, and when it sits, I multi-track it, and then I put it aside, and then do something else, and then leave it for a while, and then come back to it. And then I can't remember what I've done, and then I put it on, and it's like, yes. Or it's like, all right, boom. I do record everything, because sometimes that's the way I collect good like starting points of loops that I later do recycle, or not recycle, but use for something different, and it kind of builds up a database of recordings that you can also listen back to and say, like, oh, this was actually an amazing bass sound. I'm going to grab that, put it back into a sampler and recycle it, and then use it. But I only do this with stuff that I haven't released, like loops that haven't been into any song, but just like leftovers. But like, I used to sit with a loop way too long until it would suffocate me, and then I would lose all my all my fun with it. So I'm making really short sessions, tight and short sessions, and when I like what's going on, then I'll multi-track it and pack it away and then do another one. And it's a really fast workflow because you don't get bored of what you hear very fast, you know. I like to kind of keep it fresh and not overdo it too much. So
yeah, a lot of people work like that. It seems this jamming away, you know, put the stuff, the jam, the fiddle, jam, and then you have all this big piece, and then then it gets kind of condensed down to a track eventually, which. Like I was saying, it was at the beginning. You know, I'll do that for 10 or 15 minutes. Stop. You know, that's enough. You know, I don't. I can work with that. So it's interesting, but it's something I've never really even played with because I can't go on for that long. But I guess it's probably quite fun once you actually get a flow going. I would have thought. I think I did it more in the early days. I used to just record to DAT, you know, or something, and play with a mixer and let something flow out that way. But I haven't done like that for years since I, you know, had to restrict the way I was working. So I sort of forced into it. But it's interesting how a lot of people I've seen seems that more people work the way you just described than the way I work, or at least I know more people that work the way you describe. I don't know a lot of people that work how I work.
How do you work then?
Just, you know, I have an idea comes, you know, that those sort of ideas, once that's there, I'm running with it in terms of it's getting drawn out into a track fairly rapidly. As soon as there's some idea or some synth or some bass line that I like, or I want to work with, I might do some kind of you know, natural sweeps and play with it a bit, but I won't be going on for you know, a long periods with that. I'll have something will come together fairly quickly, and after that I'm running with it in terms of arranging. And then where I tend to get bogged down is you know, fiddling with details. But you know, I sometimes, you were somewhat someone was saying at the beginning, you know, you keep going back to something, and it can get just like a nightmare, and is the best result sometimes something that's come together fairly quickly. But I've actually found sometimes I have really just gone back to something and back to something and back to something, but I have actually been pleased with the result at the end, or I've done something that's come together quickly. But I've managed to get results both ways for some reason. Yeah. But I know you can get bogged down in details, you know. And I have been, you know, I've also been in that situation where you've spent forever on something and it just ends up still sitting there, you know, and I've wasted 50 hours on something.
But isn't there always like a track or two?
It's a learning process
on an album.
It's never wasted time, though. Yeah.
No, exactly. Yeah. It's always you've learned something along the way. Yeah. I guess.
It's fair to say that there's always like a track or two on an album that you had a little bit difficulties in, like laying it down the way you want it, and then. That's always there's always one track's like, oh, I can't get it right, and that ends up being the most popular track on the album.
You can never tell, yeah.
Yeah, this hooks into this question that I wanted to try earlier from Jasper Music. Hello, Jasper.
Right.
Do we do that? You know, do we take tracks that we've just written to the club and adjust it afterwards? Personally, I never really do.
No.
To be honest.
What are you saying, that they're perfect when you get them, and so you as soon as you get them out there?
No,
you're usually happy with the results, is what I mean. Before you even start playing them. Once you start playing them,
no, because a club is not really the final judging factor for me, because every sound system is different. It can. I mean, I trust my own monitors more than a random club sound system. I know that there are some clubs that I know the system very, very well. I might sneak it in there, you know, but I don't need it as part of the process to decide whether a track is finished. You know, to test it out in a club, and that's not something I usually do. Yeah. So I'm not saying it's perfect, you know, but
No,
it is what it is. It is what it is.
Sure,
you know what I mean?
You're happy with what you're getting out, in that way.
So do you do that? Do you take your tracks out?
It's been asked a lot in interviews. Like, it's like, do you take your track into a club to see what the reaction is from a crowd? And I'm like, me making music has nothing to do with what I do as a DJ. Like, if it fits in my sets, it's great. But if it doesn't fit, it doesn't bother me. Like, it never gets to see the daylight before it's came back from mastering. I never play anything out before it's been mastered. It's irrelevant for me if it works on the dance floor or not. Like, I don't understand that question. Like, as if
well, definitely, if the reaction's good, I think it's a positive. I definitely.
Yeah, but what if you had a bad crowd on that day and you're playing your own record and they go
I
like,
don't mean with
like...
everything. Yeah, that's not going to agree. It's not going to put me off whether I like the track or not. But if you do happen to start playing something that you've done and you're like, that's working every time, it's quite a nice gauge on that. If you're getting some good reaction, you know, it's. If you felt good about it before you played it and then other people are feeling good about it, it's just a nice sort of test, like a litmus test, but it doesn't mean I would take that as a gauge against any other stuff I was making. You know, I'd still, it's just a nice gauge. It's not vital for every track I make, you know, but it's, you know, if it's, especially if it's sort of like you know, you think you might have a kind of something that's going to be popular. I don't know. It's nice to play it, you know, to test it. I mean,
I think it depends on the type of music you're making as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It depends what you're sort of trying to achieve, I guess.
Okay, so we're nearing 2 hours. Don't want to be wasting your entire evening. I want to point out to everybody who's watching that we have a Discord server. The link should be somewhere in the description of the video, and I will be there for the next hour or two to hang out. And if there's anybody who wants to ask more questions or wants to hang out there and chat, you're welcome to join. Same goes for the guests. If you want to join and hang about, that's cool too.
Cool.
So yeah, I guess unless anybody has something to ask or say now in this chat, thanks everybody for hanging out.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks for having us around your
some
place,
really interesting
your virtual
stuff.
Place.
Every time I learn so many new things, you know, talking to colleagues, it's great.
Yeah, me too.
Okay,
Thank you guys.
Okay.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, bye everyone.
Ciao, ciao.
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 Bye-bye.
Bye.